Nobody expected Miami to begin like this. After everything that happened in the final days of the group stage, after the roster crisis, after the locker room explosion, after Otani's ultimatum that forced manager Ibata to reconsider his decisions, Samurai Japan had arrived in Miami with what appeared to be a renewed sense of unity and collective purpose. The storms had passed. The team had come through the fire together. And as the players stepped off the plane and into the Miami heat, there was every reason to believe that Samurai Japan was finally ready to show the world their true potential in the knockout rounds of the 2026 World Baseball Classic. But within hours of their arrival, something happened that made everything that had come before look like a minor disagreement. Something so shocking, so deeply disrespectful, and so completely incomprehensible that it pushed Shohei Ohtani, the man who had already given more of himself to this team than anyone had any right to ask, completely and absolutely over the edge. 3 of his own teammates verbally attacked him. His own manager threw away documents that directly affected one of his closest allies on the team. And Otani, the captain, the superstar, the heart and soul of Samurai Japan, looked at everything around him and said the words that have now sent the entire Japanese baseball world into a state of complete panic. "I can't take it anymore. I'm leaving Miami." This is the full story of what happened, who was responsible, and why the future of Japan's entire 2026 World Baseball Classic campaign is now hanging by the thinnest possible thread. The flight from Japan to Miami had been long and exhausting for every member of the Samurai Japan squad. Players arrived at their hotel tired, physically drained from the intensity of the group stage, and in need of rest and recovery before the serious business of the knockout rounds began. The coaching staff had arranged a carefully planned schedule of rest, light training, and team meetings designed to help the players recharge and refocus as quickly as possible. For Shohei Ohtani, the journey to Miami carried an additional emotional weight that his teammates could not fully understand. He had fought for this team. He had spoken up when others stayed silent. He had risked his own comfort and his own relationship with team management to ensure that the right decisions were made and the right players were protected. He had arrived in Miami not just as a baseball player, but as a leader who had already proven beyond any doubt that he would always put the team and its values above everything else. What he received in return from 3 of his own teammates was something that no leader, no matter how strong or how patient, could be expected to simply absorb and move past. The incident began on the evening of the team's first full day in Miami. The players had gathered for a team dinner arranged by the coaching staff, intended as an opportunity for the squad to relax together, enjoy each other's company, and begin building the kind of tight team atmosphere that would be essential in the high-pressure knockout environment. The atmosphere at the start of the dinner was relatively relaxed, with players chatting, laughing, and beginning to settle into their Miami surroundings. But as the evening progressed, the mood at one corner of the table began to shift in a direction that nobody around them could have anticipated. Teruaki Sato, Yuki Shuto, and Shota Morishita had been speaking among themselves in lowered voices for some time. Those sitting nearby noticed that the tone of their conversation seemed increasingly agitated, but nobody intervened, assuming it was simply the kind of venting that tired and stressed players sometimes engage in after a long and demanding period of competition. Then, the conversation stopped being private. What began as muttered comments gradually became loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. And what those people heard was deeply disturbing. Sato, Shuto, and Morishita were making comments directed at Otani. Not comments about baseball strategy or team decisions. Personal comments. Disrespectful comments. Comments that attacked Otani's leadership, mocked his influence over the team's management, and suggested in terms that were deliberately cutting and cruel that Otani believed he was above the team, above the manager, and above everyone else in the Samurai Japan camp. The comments escalated quickly. What started as pointed criticism became something far uglier. Multiple witnesses at that dinner described the language used by the 3 players as shocking, deeply inappropriate, and completely incompatible with the standards expected of players representing the Japanese national team on the world stage. Several teammates who overheard the exchange were visibly uncomfortable and unsure how to respond. The coaching staff member present at the dinner reportedly went pale, and Otani heard every single word. Those who were watching Otani's face as the comments were made described the experience as one of the most uncomfortable things they had ever witnessed. Otani sat completely still. His expression did not change dramatically. He did not immediately react with anger or raise his voice. He simply listened, and as he listened, something behind his eyes shifted in a way that told everyone watching that what was happening in that room was going to have consequences that none of them were prepared for. When the comments finally stopped, Otani set down his utensils very carefully and very deliberately. He looked across the table at Sato, Shuto, and Morishita with an expression that multiple witnesses described as the most devastating look of disappointment they had ever seen on another human being's face. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply stood up from the table, excused himself quietly, and left the room. The silence that fell over that dinner table the moment Otani walked out was total and absolute. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The three players who had made the comments sat with expressions that ranged from defiant to uncertain. Everyone else in the room sat with the uncomfortable knowledge that what had just happened was far more serious than a simple disagreement between teammates, and that the repercussions were going to be severe. But the dinner incident was only the first blow. The second came the following morning, and it was delivered not by a teammate, but by manager Ibata himself. Throughout the tournament, Kensu Kondo's situation had remained a sensitive and carefully managed issue within the Samurai Japan camp. Otani had fought personally and passionately to ensure that Kondo was treated with the respect and consideration he deserved. And the understanding within the group was that Kondo's future involvement in the tournament would be handled with care, transparency, and clear communication between management and the player. Documents had been prepared outlining the plan for Kondo's reintegration into the active roster for the knockout rounds. These documents represented a commitment, a formal acknowledgement that Kondo remained a valued and important member of the squad and that management had a clear and respectful plan for his involvement going forward. When Otani arrived at the team facility the following morning, still carrying the weight of the previous evening's events, he was met with news that stopped him cold. The documents related to Kondo's reintegration plan, the documents that represented a promise and a commitment, had been discarded by manager Ibata. Thrown away, gone, as if they had never existed. The reason given by Ibata's staff was vague and unsatisfying. Something about revised tactical priorities, about the need to approach the knockout rounds with maximum flexibility, about decisions needing to be made in the best interest of the team's overall performance. To most people hearing these explanations, they sounded like exactly what they were: excuses, justifications for a decision that had been made without adequate consideration of the human impact it would have on a player who had already been through an enormous amount during this tournament. To Otani, it sounded like a betrayal. Otani went directly to manager Ibata's office. Those standing outside the closed door said the conversation that followed was unlike anything they had ever heard from within those walls before. Otani spoke with a controlled intensity that made the walls themselves seem to vibrate. He told Ibata that what had been done to Kondo was unacceptable. He told him that throwing away those documents was not a tactical decision but a message, and it was the wrong message. He reminded Ibata of everything that had already happened, of every promise that had been made, of every crisis that had already been navigated, and he asked directly and without any diplomatic softening how management expected to maintain the trust and unity of this team when their actions consistently undermined the values they claimed to stand for. Ibata, by all accounts, struggled to respond with anything that satisfied Otani. His explanations were met with a silence that was more devastating than any argument could have been. And when Otani finally walked out of that office, he carried with him the accumulated weight of every slight, every betrayal, and every moment of disrespect that had been directed at him and at the people he cared about since this tournament began. He walked back to his room, sat down, and made a decision. The news spread through the Samurai Japan camp within minutes. Otani had told his personal representative and 2 senior members of the coaching staff that he was seriously considering leaving Miami, that he had reached a point where he could no longer operate in an environment where his leadership was mocked by teammates, where promises made to players were casually discarded, and where the values he had committed himself to protecting were treated as inconveniences rather than foundations. "I can't take it anymore," he said. "I'm leaving Miami." The reaction within the camp was immediate and desperate. Senior players rushed to speak with Otani personally. Coaching staff members who had always respected and supported him made their way to his room one by one, asking him to reconsider, pleading with him to stay, telling him that without him there was no Samurai Japan and no realistic hope of achieving anything meaningful in the knockout rounds. Manager Ibata, faced with the very real possibility that his greatest player was about to walk away from the tournament entirely, finally did what he perhaps should have done much earlier. He went to Otani himself, not as a manager, not with tactical explanations or organizational justifications. He went simply as a person who understood that he had failed the leader of his team in ways that could not be excused, and who needed to say so clearly and without reservation. The conversation between Ibata and Otani that followed was long, private, and deeply emotional. Those waiting outside said that nearly an hour passed before either man emerged. When the door finally opened, Ibata walked out first, his face drawn and serious. Then Otani appeared behind him. Otani did not smile. He did not make any grand announcement or dramatic declaration. He simply walked back toward the team facilities with the quiet, focused expression of a man who had made his decision and was now fully committed to what lay ahead. The message was clear to everyone watching. Otani was staying. But things were going to be different. The three players who had verbally attacked him were called into an immediate formal disciplinary meeting with management. Their conduct was officially recorded. Their roles within the team were placed under review, and each of them was required to face Otani directly and answer for what they had said. Kondo's documents were recovered and reinstated. His reintegration plan was formally restored and communicated to him personally by manager Ibata, who acknowledged without hesitation that the decision to discard those documents had been wrong. And Samurai Japan, battered, tested, and pushed to the very edge of collapse, somehow found a way to pull themselves back together one more time. The knockout rounds of the 2026 World Baseball Classic will now go ahead with Shohei Ohtani leading Samurai Japan into battle. But nobody inside this team, and nobody watching from the outside, will ever forget what happened in Miami in those first devastating hours after arrival. Nobody will forget the verbal attacks, the discarded documents, the ultimatum, or the desperate scramble to convince their greatest player not to walk away. And perhaps most importantly, nobody will forget that when Otani was attacked, disrespected, and pushed beyond what any reasonable person could be expected to endure, he did not simply walk away. He fought. He demanded better. He refused to accept anything less than what this team, this tournament, and the millions of fans watching from Japan truly deserved. That is what makes Shohei Ohtani different from everyone else. Not just the home runs, not just the strikeouts, not just the records and the awards and the historic achievements. It is the fact that when everything falls apart, when the people around him fail and the environment becomes toxic and the pressure becomes almost unbearable, Otani chooses to stay and fight for what is right. Samurai Japan is still standing. And as long as Otani stands with them, they always will be. Thank you for watching. If this story shocked you, moved you, or left you wanting more, please drop your reaction in the comments below. Share this video with every baseball fan you know. And please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a single moment of the most dramatic World Baseball Classic in history.